Welcome everyone who's joining us here today. I'm Diana Langley, the COO of NetHope, and on behalf of NetHope, our 65 nonprofit members and our partners, thank you for joining us here today. It is our pleasure to introduce Dr. Ken Yamashita, Counselor for USAID, to open our event. Dr. Yamashita served for 23 years as a Foreign Service Officer with USAID, attaining the rank of Career Minister, the highest civilian rank for the agency. He represented USAID in multiple countries, including as the Mission Director to Afghanistan, where he initiated the first ever Women's Empowerment Program in Afghanistan. While in Washington, he served as the Director of the Office of HIV and AIDS and as the Acting Assistant Administrator for Europe and Eurasia, and as the Director for Global Operations for the Peace Corps. Thank you again, Councillor, for being with us here today and for opening our event. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you around the world. I'd like to begin, first of all, by thanking our host, NetHope. Thank you very much, our colleagues at Okta and others in the private sector and in the humanitarian space for inviting us to be part of this very, very important partnership. Personally, I've had a chance to work with many of you in the humanitarian space. I see wonderful, wonderful members, organizations with whom I've had the great pleasure to work over the years. And we've had the opportunity to meet a number of challenges together, whether it be the delivery of the most important humanitarian goods and services to the most needy populations, whether it be logistics and supply chains that get mucked up because of all kinds of reasons, anything from internal US government bureaucracies, which I know all of you know is very, very little, not very, very seldom, to host country issues and getting certifications. But we've met each of these challenges with resilience, with commitment, with passion, and with absolute clarity of what it is that we are trying to do, which is to improve the lives of people most in need at that moment. And once again, and over the last few years, ever increasing as I found out in my wonderful conversation with Lance before this event, the issue of cybersecurity has become monumental. I've worked in this area, as Diana so kindly said, over some 20 years, and I remember back when I started, and we didn't have, not only do we not have email, we hardly had laptop computers. Things have changed, and so crises have changed and threats have changed. We now face a new threat, which is the threat of cybersecurity. The computers that we have, the devices that we have, the laptops, the phones, are all critical to the work we do, critical to the work that you do. And for us as the US government's agency to deliver humanitarian aid around the world, it is a most important job to make sure that you are able to do your job safely, securely, so that you don't need to worry about things such as, will my information be stolen by malicious actors? Are my computer files subject to hacking? What we want you to do is for you to focus on the needs on the ground, the needs of the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that you serve. And for that reason, we are so very, very happy. And again, we thank very much the opportunity to partner with NetHope, with Okta Industries, and with many of you, all of you around the world that are part of this humanitarian space so that we can improve your systems and your programs. What we are doing today is improving the platform for sharing of information. We'll get much more into the details of what that means, so that you are able to understand what are the cyber threats out there, and you're able to share information and respond accordingly. At AID, we are here to learn and to listen and to be responsive. And so it is very important for us to also hear from you what you are facing, so we can provide you with the necessary tools so that you can do your program and your work as important as it is. Again, thank you very much, Lance. Thank you, NetHope. Thank you, Okta. And most importantly, thank you all of you members, humanitarian organizations out there, large and small, doing the very important work that needs to be done on behalf of the most vulnerable women, children, and men around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. We really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. My name is Lance Pierce, and I'm the CEO of NetHope. NetHope was founded 20 years ago as an intentional partnership between the technology sector and the world's leading relief, development, and conservation organizations. We were founded on the premise that better use of digital data and partnerships was the path to serving more people in more places more effectively around the world. And over the past 2 decades, in times of clarity and through times of uncertainty, NetHope has worked in partnership with the tech sector to help our members, the world's leading impact organizations, achieve their missions. NetHope's 65 member organizations serve on the order of 1.2 billion people in more than 190 countries, and collectively they deploy over 60% of all the international aid spent every year through the NGO sector. Now, we know that humanitarian organizations work in areas where lives are at risk, in war zones, in conflict zones, and emergency response zones, and all of these carry the risk of injury, or in some cases, direct attack. And certainly in the past year, some number of the organizations that we work with have seen loss of life in their teams due to these physical threats. But what's less well known is that humanitarian organizations, their employees, and their beneficiaries or their program participants are under attack today by new threats, digital threats. Incidences of cyber attacks, data theft, breaches, and incursions of computer systems, and other forms of cybercrime, many of which have links back to causing physical harm, are rising dramatically. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as people moved their work online, attackers followed, and there was a notable increase in cyber incidents. This trend accelerated again earlier this year as the Ukraine crisis intensified. These attacks are not only confined to attempts to steal money and hold payrolls for ransom, as we've seen recently in the news just this week, nor are they the actions of amateurs. The new and increasing threat on the horizon for organizations providing direct and human service relief around the world is coming from nation states. And their target is not the payroll, it's the sensitive data that these organizations hold. Nations using state-of-the-art technology are increasingly targeting the humanitarian sector to identify the individuals they're serving and where they're located, whether political dissidents or other targets may be living among displaced and vulnerable populations. They want to know the locations of service that these organizations are providing, and the names and the location, and in some cases, the homes of the staff who are providing those services. They want data on your donors and your funders, and if your donors and funders are from another government, they want to know the chain of relationships and people that funds and makes your direct human service work in communities around the world possible. So we're here today to mount a collective response to this growing threat. NetHope is proud to stand on the stage with our partners at Okta, one of the leading independent identity providers in the world, alongside the CyberPeace Institute, a European NGO whose mission is to ensure the rights of people to security, dignity, and equity in cyberspace, as well as the SDC, the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, and USAID, the US Agency for International Development, who is hosting our physical presence at this event today. This group is forging the public-private coalition who will work together to do what NetHope has a long track record of doing over these past 2 decades, providing a community-led collective impact response to these growing threats. Today, we're announcing the intent to create a Global Humanitarian Information and Sharing Analysis Center, or an ISAC. So when businesses started going online 30 years ago to deliver their services securely, ISACs became the industry response to identifying shared threats and developing joint responses. ISACs were stood up on a sector-by-sector basis, from banking to energy to transportation to many, many more. And today, most industries have their own dedicated ISAC to deal with their collective cyber risks. Because how do we know when we've actually been breached by an intruder? Well, the answer is that breaches are discovered by information security and digital protection professionals who regularly come together in an ISAC to share relevant information, to analyze potential anomalies that could signal a breach has taken place, and to take collective action in shared strategies that isolate and contain the threat and ensure continuity of operations and human safety. Recent reporting suggests that only 1 in 10 NGOs have the ability to provide their staff with cybersecurity training, and only 1 in 5 NGOs are sufficiently well-resourced to have a cybersecurity plan, meaning that cyber attacks targeting humanitarian organizations will continue to be a significant threat in the future. And in the wake of the large increases in attacks in recent years, it's also clear that humanitarian entities have no choice but to take proactive measures designed to counter cyber threats, the worst of which can cause loss of reputation, loss of the ability to operate, and loss of life. So there's no silver bullet or all-powerful technology that can prevent cyber breaches, but there are great lessons learned from the past 30 years of experience with private sector, industry-led, collective responses to improving cybersecurity coordination, working together as humanitarian and conservation aid organizations via an information sharing and analysis center, an ISAC devoted to that sector, is a clear and inevitable next step. The humanitarian and non-for-profit sectors are among the last of the sectors who do not yet have an ISAC. And we at NetHope, along with our esteemed partners here, intend today to remedy that situation. Now, before I introduce our panel today, I'd like to turn the microphone over to my friend, Erin Baudo Felter, who is the Vice President of Social Impact and Sustainability at Okta, to offer a few remarks. Erin, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Lance and Counselor, for those great opening remarks in that context. As Lance said, I'm Erin Baudo Felter. I'm the Vice President of Social Impact and Sustainability at Okta. I've had the pleasure of working at the intersection of business and society for over 15 years. And I can definitely tell you in that time, there have not been enough days like today. This is very, very special. We have 3 sectors coming together to do something big and needed and poised to drive important change. I am very excited to be here with my colleagues and friends from NetHope and USAID. So for those not familiar with Okta, we are a security company. Our vision is to enable everyone to safely use any technology. And we believe that every organization should have the ability to protect the digital identities of the people in their networks. Okta for Good, the social impact arm of Okta, is an extension of this vision. So when Okta says enable everyone to safely use any technology, Okta for Good's role is to ensure that everyone really means everyone. This includes civil society organizations doing society's most critical work, and most importantly, the people that they serve. We are very lucky to work with thousands of nonprofits as grantees, as customers, and as partners. And we hear over and over again from them that human capital is their most important and valuable resource, especially when it comes to security. However, most nonprofits struggle to hire people who can configure and manage platforms like Okta, let alone mount adequate cyber defenses. Aligned with Okta's vision and this increasingly challenging threat landscape for nonprofits that Lance just mentioned, we believe that we have a responsibility to help strengthen the social sector against cyber attacks. Most recently, we announced the launch of Okta for Good's nonprofit cybersecurity portfolio, including more than $1 million in new grants to do just that, some of which are actually going to some of our friends that are with us today, NetHope and the CyberPeace Institute. And while we as a technology company are intentionally giving our time, our products, and our money to organizations, from the smallest of nonprofits who are just beginning their cyber journeys to the very largest NGOs that are setting industry standards, we absolutely cannot do this alone. And that is why we are so excited to partner with USAID and NetHope to establish this information sharing and analysis center and help humanitarian organizations respond to current and future cyber threats. I am thrilled to be here today to discuss this new partnership, why it's so critical, and how we can all work together to drive better cybersecurity across sectors and industries. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin. And let's get right into the conversation. We've got a really terrific panel of experts here today, a well-rounded panel, public, private, and civil society, who can really unpack this issue and I think help us all understand a little more. In addition to Erin on the panel, we'll also be hearing today from Stan Byers, who is the cybersecurity team lead for USAID. We'll be hearing from Silvio Flückiger, who is the deputy head of humanitarian aid for the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And we'll be hearing from Stéphane Duguin, who is the CEO of the CyberPeace Institute. And let's just get right into the questions here. So I think, Stan, why don't we start with you? USAID has really been an advocate and a driver of better cybersecurity across industries. You're working on a variety of strategies there. You launched a digital strategy in 2020, which NetHope was one of the participants in the development of that. And you outlined a path to secure digital ecosystems. And so tell us a little bit about some of your journey to better cybersecurity and why it's become a critical focus for USAID.
Sure. Thanks, Lance. I mean, we're very excited to have gotten to this point with everything. And I think your question kind of points to that. This has been an evolution, and where this is another step along that path that we're very glad to have gotten to. I also want to highlight the role of the USAID digital strategy team. We could not be doing the work we're doing on our cybersecurity team without the support of their team. And we actually spun out of what they're doing, and we see what's happening with emerging technologies, which is really what the digital strategy team, our digital strategy is about, and cybersecurity as two parts of the same set of issues. That really, how do these things affect what's happening in the development and humanitarian space? And the reason why cyber is so critical for and such a fast-growing focus for USAID is that it really cuts across everything that we do, from preventing conflict to climate change issues to countering authoritarianism and inequality to humanitarian response to a whole range of different things, all the different parts of what aid does. So much of it has this strong digital component to it. And increasingly, we're using digital technologies in what we do, in our communications, in our data gathering, our analysis, and in the implementation of different programs, and in our, in this case, humanitarian work in so many different places. But with that comes a whole set of new and fast evolving vulnerabilities. And as you talked about in your, so eloquently in your speech, many of the populations we're working with from a humanitarian perspective are some of the most vulnerable in the world. And we have to be very careful about that responsibility of care to protect the information of those individuals so as not to create new risks for them. And that means that in order to achieve these goals we have as an agency across all these different lines of effort, we have to include cybersecurity as a part of what we're doing. And so that's really kind of where our team started, and that's where we're continuing to build within the agency.
So it sounds like then that this is becoming less of a standalone, and you're trying to really build it in more to the way you operate, the way you think about the work, embedding it from the beginning. Is that fair to say? Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what we have to do. Otherwise it becomes something that we talk about, but that we don't really do fully as an agency. The only way we do this effectively, and that really enables the digital development components of what we're doing and the digital humanitarian responses of what we're doing, is that we build it into our systems, our processes, our thinking, our training, our strategies, all of it, because there's less and less distinction between digital work and humanitarian work. They're so much the same now because we're so dependent on so many different digital technologies to have these really positive effects. I mean, they really provide us a lot of opportunities, and those are things that we need to take advantage of. And this is where the world's going. This is the environments in which we work. They're changing very quickly. They're becoming much more connected. We need to keep up with that. So we can't afford to look back. But as we look forward, we have to also recognize that there are these new threats and risks that come with that. And so therefore we need to build an acknowledgement and response to those threats and risks into everything we do and into all the different ways that we think about it. Yeah, and that landscape certainly tracks very closely with what we hear from our members around the world as well, that digital is increasingly become one with the service that you deliver. You can't, in many instances, deliver the services that you set out to do unless you've got a digital component or a data component to it of some kind. It's really the future of where this space is moving. I mean, every space, I mean, across every sector is moving this, but the humanitarian space, is included in that. And so the future of humanitarian work includes a big digital component, and therefore must include a strong cyber component as well. Yeah, great. No, that's really helpful. I want to turn to Stéphane now. You're a civil society organization, and these kinds of partnerships at least in our experience anyway, they don't really work as well unless you've got the perspectives of the people who are on the front lines, the people who are really most adversely affected in some cases by cyber breaches, and building that sort of thing in. And you certainly work with a whole range of organizations at CyberPeace Institute. And why don't you share with us a little more about the sweep of your work and the role that cybersecurity, plays in the communities that you steward and the groups that you work with?
With pleasure, and thank you for having us. It's great to be part of this crowd and to have this ambition to really provide something unique for the communities of humanitarian actors and beyond them, NGOs. So the CyberPeace Institute is an independent and neutral organization. We are based in Switzerland, a non-for-profit. In fact, we are quite known as the NGO which is providing for free operational targeted support when it comes to cybersecurity, and we provide this support to other NGOs. So this gives us a vantage point in terms of what is the threat landscape today, what are the needs, and what is really the requirements, the basic requirements for a lot of different NGOs, a lot of different humanitarian actors across the board today. What we provide to our community, so we have a program which is called the CyberPeace Builders. It's a quite unique corporate volunteer-based program where we service today more than 70 NGOs in order to be more resilient, so to be less, that their margin for maneuver is better when it comes to their operational capacity to be resilient, to be strong against cyber attacks. Also, sadly enough, we support them when they are in the middle of an incident. So that's something that we in the CyberPeace Institute can in-source. We have a capacity of cyber investigators, forensic investigators, so we can track and help them to see who is attacking them and what we can do. And we also help in the recover phase. What we learned from this is that NGOs first have very different, I would say, state of maturity when it comes to their digitization strategy. This is very linked to where you are in your digitization strategy. And in the end, they're a bit at the worst of the cybersecurity equation, because they are, for a lot of them, they are linked to a historical stack of technological choices. So it's like a pileup, a mashup of technology, which is quite difficult to secure on one end. On the other end, they are not competitive on the talent market, the capacity to attract and retain talent when it comes to cybersecurity. The culture of the NGO, a lot of time, is not a culture of cybersecurity, also because it's a patchwork of actors. In the humanitarian sector, actors that are providing the humanitarian services, a lot of time, they're okay, you have staff, but you have also volunteers, but you also fellows, you have the beneficiaries, and all of this across several countries and jurisdictions. It's very complicated to have a culture of cybersecurity which is enforced, also in a context where turnover is quite high. And I would say also the resources. It's complicated if your donors really do not understand that you need to prioritize cybersecurity, to allocate euros, Swiss franc, dollars to cybersecurity operations. When you have to report to your donors, you need to explain that the money was going exactly to the program. So this puts these entities in quite a complicated situation. And I would say at the top of the maturity, because some organizations, they did this work, they are really thought through when it comes to cybersecurity. But having this discussion with them, they're always telling me, you know what? Even when we have these capabilities, I can earmark, I can have staff, sharing information, that's the topic of the day, sharing information, I want to share information, but what am I going to do if I know that I'm under attack? What do I do with this information? What do I do with the threat intelligence, with the indicator of compromise, if I don't have the resources coming on top of the information to be activated? And which is why in the CyberPeace Institute, we launched the CyberPeace Builders program, where not only we provide information, but we have a mean in order to do something about it. So you're asking for the threat landscape very quickly. It's the worst, sadly enough. You mentioned before, Lance, is that they are, targeted by criminal groups. The intent is financial, clearly, is to make money, but they're also targeted by state actors. So you have attacks that are there to destroy systems, attacks that are just there to disrupt the functioning of system. We saw that since the invasion of Ukraine. So we have a specific tracer on the CyberPeace Institute website. It's a free resources. Please use it, where you will see the kind of campaign that the sector is suffering. It is attack to steal data, clearly, for geopolitical intent or financial intent, but also attack of surveillance to spy. And I'm really happy to participate to this venture, where we could have the capacity to share information on the whole stack of the cyber attacks, from the very simple phishing to CEO fraud to the more spyware high-end part of the story. And we are indeed already running a pilot in this context with CyberPeace Institute to test technologies in order to enforce information exchange between parties that want to trust each other, but they cannot really trust each other. So what kind of technology do we need to put in place? So happy to tell more about this.
Yeah, that's a really helpful overview. And, that certainly tracks with what we hear from our members, this idea that, if you build, as the saying goes, if you build it, they will come. In the case of cybersecurity, it's a maturity question. It's a capacity question. You can provide sophisticated threat analysis, sophisticated information and resources, and yet the organizations that we work with don't have the ability to make good decisions based on that information. They can take it in, but they can't consume it. They can't internalize it. They can't use it to make better management decisions. And in part, that's a capacity question. So we definitely hear that as well. But I'd be curious on, we shared some of the reasons in kind of my opening remarks about, kind of why there's a target on not-for-profits. But I know you're a long observer of this space, and you've got a lot of depth of experience. Why do you think that these organizations are being targeted today? Is there one or more drivers that are pushing these organizations to the center of the target for these new threat actors?
So, you have to see this, I guess, from two different points of view. The first one is that because the sector is not really secure, it's subject to almost indiscriminated attack. So, the attacks are going to the least secure at the end of the day. You're mentioning some figures before, Lance. It's 1 out of 10 NGOs, they only train their staff on cybersecurity. 1 out of 4 NGOs, they're really monitoring their network. Only 1 in 5 have a cyber plan, cybersecurity, cyber resilience, a crisis plan. And then if you look at the numbers in terms of attacks, when the intent from a criminal group is about money, attack goes up to more than $1 million when it comes to money that is stolen to an NGO. And when a humanitarian actor is attacked at day one, the money is stolen, will not be recovered. But imagine the impact on the operation in the long run, and also the trust that you lose when it comes to your donors and your beneficiaries. So it's like a one event to stop everything. So you have this problem of low cybersecurity maturity on one hand. But on the other hand, these NGOs, some of them, these humanitarian actors, are targeted by threat actors that are highly skilled, highly specialized, and go for the big game, those big game hunters. So our big game hunting with big money, because some of these actors have a lot of donation. Humanitarian sector, a year before was more than 30 billion in donation. So there's money there. But also big game hunting from the geopolitical point of view. And there, because these actors that are in the front line, they are processing very sensitive data of very sensitive population. And here, that's the treasure. And that's what attackers is trying to get. So it's very difficult. That's one of the sole actors, in fact, that is targeted both by states and criminals with high intent and high technology.
Yeah, certainly that also tracks with things that we're seeing in some of the recent high-profile cyber attacks on companies, in recent years have not been on directly on the companies themselves, but on suppliers, partners, contributors as well. So that becomes a place where you can introduce new threats by focusing on either the weakest link or what's perceived to be the weakest link. And in this case, that's certainly true sometimes of the organizations that we work with. Well, let's come around to another government perspective on this. Silvio, really thank you for taking part in this today. We know that this is definitely an issue that is in the awareness of the Swiss government. It's something that that you and your colleagues around SDC are aware of and working on. And love to hear a little bit about how you're thinking about this problem and what that may mean for how you operate going forward.
Many thanks, Lance, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I hope you hear me. Can you please confirm?
Yes, we can hear you.
If digitalization is a coin, cybersecurity, I would rather say cyber insecurity, is only one side of that coin. And let me therefore start with the other side of that coin, which is a more positive one. I think, and I guess we all agree, digitalization has a huge potential and many benefits. And this is especially true when it is used for humanitarian action. In its humanitarian action, Switzerland is using new technologies not systematically, but the more and more. We use them not as a goal as in itself, but rather as a means to maximize the impact of our humanitarian action. Let me be concrete, and I will then get to the other part of the coin. During, for instance, the wildfires in the Amazonas 2020, Swiss Humanitarian Aid developed an application which allows a real-time tracking of how wildfires develop. This tool was then handed over to the Bolivian authorities and allowed them to coordinate its firefighting without our support. And we all also agree in cash transferring programs, the digitalization is becoming the more and more important part. But there is, however, a big but, and this but is written in capital letters. This brings me now to this other side of the coin, which is today's topic. In the beginning of this year, and it has not been mentioned yet, as I understood, it was made clear to us humanitarian aid is not immune to cyber attacks. The ICRC was victim of a large-scale cyber attack. Personal data of moreover than 500,000 affected people were hacked. We talk here about people like detainees, missing people, and so forth and so on. Switzerland condemns such attacks in general, and in the particular one, the one on ICRC. Today, there is no possible protection of vulnerable people without protection of their personal data. It is therefore that Switzerland takes this security, cybersecurity very, very seriously. How do we do that? In 2020, the ICRC, OCHA, and Switzerland put their heads together to answer the following question, which is actually the same question which is put here in this very panel. How can organizations, states, civil societies, academia, and the private sector join forces to maximize the benefits of technology while minimizing the risks? So I think that's the very topic of today. What was the result of that putting together all the heads? Actually, it was launched, the Humanitarian Data and Trust Initiative. I hope, and I'm assured that you're all aware of it. Also, USAID has been playing a vital role in it. The aim is probably similar to the one of this ISAC initiative, advancing the protection of and responsible use of humanitarian data. And it will be very important that this now new initiative will feed in this other initiative in order to also to avoid duplication. And maybe a final word, what is actually the role of donor states in cybersecurity? As a donor state, I think we have a particular responsibility to create an environment that allows humanitarian organizations to successfully carry out their mandate. So we have to enter into contact in a political and diplomatic dialogue with other states in order to make sure that it is understood what that means. And this is actually also assured by the state in which humanitarian action is actually implemented.
Yeah, that's helpful, Silvio. And can I ask, are you, is the Swiss government also thinking about this as kind of an embedded strategy going forward? Is this also something that, you know, as you say, cybersecurity is one side of the coin. Is this something that that you think you'll be building, you and your colleagues and the Swiss government will be building into future strategies and your future thinking? Is this going to just become normalized?
Yes, it is, but I also have to admit it's a long way to go, and we have still to do our homework. And I'm very pleased to have here also really technical expertise in this panel, but I have to admit we lack this expertise. That's a fact. We do have some sort of expertise, but I couldn't admit that it's now already systematically introduced in our action, but I think it's now it's a sad eye-opener with this attack on the ICRC, but it's becoming, and we're getting there hopefully as soon as possible.
Yes, it's definitely an area where we're all continuing to do our homework. So I think that's definitely well said, and thank you for those thoughts. Erin, I want to go to you again. You know, in your remarks, you were talking about the need for more public-private action on this, the need to bring in companies because, you know, frankly, the tools and services that that organizations are going to need, in addition to the information sharing, are really all going to be products of the private sector in most instances. You know, this partnership that we're really launching here today and building is a step in the right direction, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think industry could be doing more of, should be doing more of. What's the role here of the private sector?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. I mean, I think taking sort of a step back and just looking at what is required of partnership generally across sectors, I think there's some really good lessons in what we have done with this effort, with this initiative. I think that we've all been really clear and honest about what each of us is good at and what we are not. And defining what each sector's role needs to be in the collaboration, right? And this takes a tremendous amount of empathy, of humility, of honesty. And I think, again, what's been wonderful about the work we've done together on this ISAC is that, number one, the vision was already so strong and so compelling and shared when we started. So that's helpful. But we all also came to the table from this place of humility and curiosity, which allowed us to quickly build trust. So I think that's certainly a lesson for the private sector, to show up from a place of empathy, humility, and honesty, which maybe isn't always our leading mode, but it's really, I think, relevant for all of us. And it's been a great lesson for me in just seeing how these things can work, whereas many times these kinds of partnerships are really challenging. So I think that's one takeaway, specifically for the tech sector, and I would say private sector generally, because, you know, as we always say at Okta, every company is now a technology company, every organization is now a technology organization. So there's things that every company can do in service of what we are trying to achieve here. I think that the number one thing is we have to listen first, right? We need to ask civil society organizations what they are facing, what the impact is that they're trying to deliver, and what they need. And we need to do that before we try to sell them anything, right? Before we try to sell them on our tools, tell them how great our stuff is and why they should buy it, right? And once we have that information, if we're really listening, then I think we have an opportunity to not just think about the tech and the tools that we have, but to think about all the resources that we can bring to bear to support a stronger social sector, in particular in cyber, right? And there's really three things. There's our people, there's our tech and tools, and there's our financial resources, our dollars. So when you think about each of those three things, looking at people first, we need to ensure that the expertise of our teams benefits more than just our immediate network of customers and partners. And there's a tremendous appetite for this inside of companies. Research that we often use says that more than 90% of employees today expect their companies to lead with a purpose beyond just profits, and that almost 3/4 of them expect to make a social impact in their work. So we know there's an appetite for this. We know that there's sort of a ready and willing workforce to deliver some of this to the social sector. And I think, you know, what Stéphane mentioned about the CyberPeace Builders program, it's a great tangible example of the kind of programs that exist that can help kind of bridge, right, the sort of like corporate employee desire to help with what civil society needs. I think that's a really important program and example of how this can work. So that's people. Technology. We need to make our technology accessible for civil society organizations. We need to make it easier to use. We need to make it trustworthy and secure. And you know, many companies do this by donating and discounting technology for nonprofit organizations. We do that at Okta, but it's also about, again, going back to listening and understanding the use cases, understanding the very unique context for humanitarian civil society nonprofit organizations and optimizing for that. And then the last thing is our dollars. Corporate giving actually is something many of us engage in, right? But it's only a small fraction of total philanthropy. It's something around 4% of total philanthropy in the US. So we know that we can't necessarily solve all of the problems with the size of the checks, at companies like ours. But what we can do that I think is really important is that we can take on more risk than more traditional funders, which means I think we have this interesting opportunity to step up first and support these new and innovative ideas. In particular, like the humanitarian ISAC that we're launching today. And then I think we look to institutional funders and governments to help us take those ideas and scale them. And I think that's an opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, Stéphane, I want to bounce that question over to you. You have a long history yourself with industry, with government, in a variety of roles. You've seen this, and now in civil society from the other side. What is it that you think there needs to be more of to help make partnerships like this succeed? Because clearly, no one sector can really accomplish this alone. That was part of one of the drivers for creating ISACs in the first place. It was a place to share diverse perspectives and information. But what are you seeing that the actors here in this ecosystem could be doing more of to really help this along?
That's a good question. Thank you. And to build on what Erin was mentioning before, it's really going into the nitty-gritty details. So what are the hurdles for this cooperation today? What are the friction points? If you look at the humanitarian side, so the recipient side, what is quite complicated is I discuss with a lot of colleagues from other organizations. They always say, yes, I need help. But by the way, at the same time, I don't have any time to receive help. So that's, the starting point. And on the other hand, you have corporation, which indeed would like to provide, to Erin's point, they want to provide talent, they want to provide tools, they would like to finance. But the corporations are quite big, strategy are a bit all over the place sometimes, and it's difficult to find the right person in order to have something that is really actionable. So when we built the CyberPeace Builders, we did a 1-year survey with the 2 communities, with quite a positive starting point, saying, okay, people want to work together, they just don't have exactly the means to do it. And then on the recipient side, we decided to go into, okay, what is it that you need? We didn't try, to one solution fits everyone. To say, in fact, what you need is this, your password or whatever. We really went to their need. And in fact, we even hire regional advisors. So we have presence in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, to really, craft the need to the reality of the field. And then we have now more than 200 missions that are out there in our platform in order to take someone to help for free this community. So this works. And then on the other end, we could negotiate with companies to have something very practical, a few hours every time for their best talents to have something very, very hands-on to help the NGOs. And we do this all like a due diligence in the middle to facilitate the flow. So what we faced, to your question, was not the non-willingness to help or to work together. It was like it was not really organized, and the way was missing. When it comes to governments, what we saw missing today, and is still missing, and that's something that we, CyberPeace Institute, invest resources now for a report that will be out at the beginning of the year, is the threat landscape, the reality of the attacks. Who is attacking? Who is attacked? What are the modus operandi? What are the human impact, the societal harm at scale? And to have really figures that are backed, that can be peer-reviewed, so that policy makers can take policy decision on basis of evidence. And this in this field is clearly needed. We did that in the context of healthcare with quite of at least a success to provide this data, and we'll do the same work in this field. And we really hope that having that in mind would help public sector, private sector to make more informed choice when they want to support the humanitarian sector.
Yeah, I think that's really terrific. And as you know, there's been a lot of references to capacity building and the need to kind of to build up to this maturity to be able to operate at the level that I think is called for here. And as we look out to the next couple of years and we think about that capacity building arc, we think about the way we're going to get there. Love to hear the panel's thoughts just before we go to Q&A here about where you think we need to go in 3 to 5 years, and what's the kind of the nugget or the insight about that you might want to leave with the online audience here. Stan, I'm going to start with you. If you think about where we need to be in 3 to 5 years with this process, where are we going? What's happening? Share that from the USAID perspective.
Absolutely. I think looking forward, we have to see this as a core part of what we do. Now, we don't, in the humanitarian world, we don't normally think about cybersecurity. And I think the statistics you pointed out earlier about the number of different organizations that are prepared on cyber issues illustrates that. But looking forward, just as every company is now a tech company, every humanitarian organization is also now a tech organization. Okay? And so this need, and every donor is a tech organization. So we need to embrace that, recognize all the good that can come out of that, and that we need to be using these technologies, but we need to be making the security of those technologies and the data that those technologies hold as core to what we do. But in order to achieve that, we also then need to build the capacities that we need. And maybe even more important than that, we need to build it into our systems, into what we do and how we operate. Because the people are going to continue to rotate in and out of different positions, different organizations. We need to build it into what we do. And so as donors, we need to build it into our procurement mechanisms. We need to build it, we need to create the right incentives for the partners that we work with on humanitarian response, that they feel like they have the space to put this into their proposals, and that this isn't a threat to them getting additional funding. And then maybe the third thing I'd say is what Erin pointed to, which was continue to build on these partnerships. I mean, this nexus of humanitarian actors, the private sector, and donors coming together to really say, look, working together, we can do a lot more on this, and we have to, because each of us does bring different strengths. And so we need to leverage each other's strengths to achieve that. We need to share information, because all of us have access to different information, and we have different expertise that allows us to interpret that information. We need to think from the kind of the start, as different technologies are developed, what are the cybersecurity requirements that need to be built into that for the context in which they're going to be used. And that includes the human context of what, who's going to be using this, what are they going to be able to do with it, and how are we going to mitigate the risk. And then finally, I think we have to also recognize that a number of organizations, and certainly a lot of beneficiaries, simply are never going to be able to get to a place where they can defend against a nation state attack. We can't expect them to. We can't lay the burden of security just at the user level. So we need to think at a donor level, at an organization level, what are the things that we can be doing? What are the resources, tools, technologies, processes, systems, whatever, that we can help develop, working with humanitarian actors and beneficiaries, so that they have additional tools to help improve their systems and mitigate these risks. We're not going to solve the problem, but we can reduce a lot of the risks with some fairly straightforward approaches, and then focus more of our efforts on the really hard problems that I think are going to continue to evolve and develop as we go forward.
Thank you for that, Stan. Silvio, we've got just a minute left before we go to Q&A. I'd like to get your response to that as well. We've got to build this maturity curve. We've got to move deliberately and thoughtfully through the next 3 to 5 years. What do you see in that time frame that we should be emphasizing or keeping top of mind as we look at really solving some of these issues?
Many thanks, Lance. And I already said it, and to make a long story short, I think cybersecurity at some point should not be any longer an option, but a sort of humanitarian imperative. And I also saw already the question which has been asked, and that's definitely also true. We have to do an awareness raising as soon as NGOs will put some sort of funding for this kind of measures to assure cybersecurity. Donors might at that stage today be a bit reluctant, because it's not something which is going to directly to actually the affected population. So I try to answer also that question. That's what I think. We have to make sure that it's becoming a reality, a normality, and that we also see the relevance of cybersecurity, and then we also are ready and willing to finance such parts when it comes within a proposal.
That's great. Very helpful perspective, everyone. I think let's open it up now. We have some questions coming in from the online audience, and we'll open it up. I think, Diana, you're going to field those for us.
Yes, I am. And folks, keep your questions coming. Even if we don't answer them here, we will try and answer them a little bit later. So we're actually going to go first to Erin from a question from the audience, which I think you sort of touched on, but this is a little bit more explicit, which is saying that philanthropy is a start in engaging the private sector, and we all appreciate the motives behind that. But is there any economic self-interest in supporting civil society with cybersecurity like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's something absolutely we can be honest about, right? There's kind of always a tension in the kind of work that folks in my job do between sort of business impact and societal impact. Ideally, you find the win-win, right? And that's sort of the trick of this job. But there's always a balance, and there's always sort of considerations on all sides. I think sort of there's two ways I think about that question. There's like sort of the immediate business opportunities and impacts. When you think about something like the fact that we give away our technology. So if you're a very small nonprofit, if you have less than 50 employees, you can have Okta for free, right? And many, many, many of our customers fall into that bucket. It's sort of a purely philanthropic play. The balance of those customers are paying us. Some of them are paying us as sort of like enterprise customers. And there's revenue from that. And we hold that in the company, and we hold that tension. My team is not charged with going and sort of building the revenue side of that as our goal. Our goal is impact, which really helps to sort of protect the priorities that we have. But there is a business impact, and that's something that actually is helpful when we talk about the work internally, and we talk about pushing it forward and doing even more. There's also very tactical things, like we know that when I talk about the win-win, you know, one of the most important things an organization can do to sort of like make the most progress on their cyber posture the most quickly is to implement multi-factor authentication, MFA. Something like, you know, 80% can get you 80% of the way there if you just implement MFA, which, if, for those that don't know, when you log into your bank and then they send you a text with a code and you have to put it in, that's multi-factor authentication. And basically make sure you are who you say you are before you get in. Our product does this, right? So if we're giving it away to nonprofits for free or for discount, we know that it's getting them that 80% of the way there, and that's helping them. But we also know that that's a market for us. That's sort of the story of our product. So I think that sort of immediate balance is definitely there and definitely top of mind, but we tend to, because of the way, at least at Okta, things are set up, we tend to sort of skew toward that impact as the primary objective, certainly for my team. Now, when you think long-term, I think this is really interesting because if you think about it, the universe of organizations or people in the world that can use Okta today, or use another technology tool today, like Okta, is not as big as the universe that can't. And so when we think about where this can go in the future, smart philanthropy that is impact aligned, but that is also strategically aligned with the business can actually start to build in new markets for technologies like ours in the future. And I think that's something we should be clear about. And I think that that's actually very compelling. And, you know, I don't necessarily care if they use Okta or something else, but it's about seeding the ground for more organizations and more people to be able to utilize technologies that can help with their cyber posture. I think that that's a win, certainly for the world and for the business as well. So that's kind of how I think about it.
I really like that. And I think, there's something in there that we're talking a little bit about the cost implications of all of this kind of stuff. And actually, I'm going to jump through some of the questions here because Stan, I think I'm going to address this one to you, because from Pietro in the audience, we have, this is a great example of collaboration, and it's all very wonderful, as he writes. He says, but I'd like to ask the donor representatives on the call how they're looking at funding this financial challenge when it comes to embedding dedicated funding in grants and contracts. And I think you touched on this, and maybe Silvio, you can also jump in here a little bit, because that is the great question here, is how to be sustainable.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Pietro, thank you for the question. I think this is something we haven't done well yet. And I'll just be honest. I mean, these are still new issues for us as well. And this is one of the things that we're trying to push as a team. is we need to rethink some of our systems and our budgeting and what it's going to take to address these issues. We're starting to put some resources in place to help in response, to help in training and so forth. But as far as building it into our budgeting and into our program design and so forth, that's still a process that we're going through right now. And we need to continue to build awareness internally within the agency and within and our broader government in order to do that, because we don't control, unfortunately, we don't control all of those mechanisms directly. So it's going to take time, but we recognize increasingly as an agency that we have to do this. And so we're working towards that. But I would strongly advocate that, all of us as donors need to think about this as, again, a core part of what we do. And therefore we need to put in place the procurement and budgeting systems and all the boring stuff that we don't normally like to talk about, but that's really where it matters. And so we need to build it into that piece of what we do as well. And so that we create the space and the right incentives for organizations to do this on the ground and to build it into what they're doing.
Excellent. And then, Lance, here are some questions that come to you, which have got a similar vein about efficiency here. So we've got one from Rob Arnold that starts with, are you planning to borrow from any of the existing ISACs frameworks and processes? And he specifically mentions the legal services ISAO, which was a spin-off of the financial services ISAC, and they helped with process and people. And then while you're mulling over that one, I'm going to add from Catherine in the audience, who says, and I'd like to better understand how this ISAC will be created. If the announcement is today that the intent is to create it, do other partners need to come in? Let's talk about funding that might be needed, and will a team be assembled? Lance.
That's a perfect pivot because we're coming up on time, and I was going to cover some of that material as we close out the morning here. So on the question of will we gather information about existing precedents, existing ISACs? We'll be working with the entities that are very experienced in this, and the answer is yes. We already are. There are a number of people and entities in the broader community of ISACs, the broader cybersecurity community that NetHope has strong relationships with around the world. We've consulted them as part of this process. We've been working closely with them, some of them for many years now. And we hope and expect that they're going to be taking part in this. Time is too short to be reinventing wheels. The problem is acute and getting worse. And so we have an opportunity to take advantage of, to learn from the vast body of experience that's been built up over the past few decades about how to do this well. And that's certainly something that we want to do also. And as far as the question is concerned about working with the other stakeholders in the area. I'm sorry, Dan. The second part of the question was about the
joining together, and especially with funding. And we've said we're going to launch it today, but then what does it look like to bring the team together and those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for sure, today is the announcement of this coalition that is really the start of what's going to make this possible. We absolutely need more participants through the support of Okta and our NetHope corporate partner, Cisco. We do have a smaller functioning version of this idea currently operating at NetHope. We are already running a service now in this vein. But it actually could expand. It could be much more significant. And so that really would be the goal. We'd like to have something commensurate with the challenge, equal to the threat. And the goal would be for us to be able to put something together as a collective that would be much more robust, much more comprehensive.
And just to let everyone know, we are running a little bit late, but we have so many questions that I'm going to take one or two more just because the audience is excited. So I'm going to address the next one to Stéphane, and Stéphane, you also get a double one, a combo. So one is from Mercy Lean, who says, what should be the immediate priority in ensuring we're moving towards considering cybersecurity as core? And that links to this one from Marva, who says, we need to act now to address the lack of security planning in NGOs. As they digitize their core applications and run through aid and all that kind of bits, what happens when X is not available? For example, a target breach, and then how do we deal with that? Not least because it is the people on the ground, but it is also our donors that are looking for that kind of stuff. So, Stéphane, some of your thoughts there.
No, thank you. Very quickly, because we're on time. I guess one word was said several times, which boils that down, which is culture. When we engage with the organization, humanitarian or in the wider sector NGOs, what we can really identify is this lack of culture in order to consider that cybersecurity is so important. And when the culture is there, it's not a shared one. And sometimes, a lot of times, the branch of the NGO or humanitarian organization which is managing the business development, the raising of funds, has no knowledge, no understanding that this is needed in each and every conversation that they're having with donors. So that's one angle. The second bit is the digitization strategy having at its core the cybersecurity requirements. There, what we see in the request that we are receiving from the NGOs that we are supporting, a part of these 200 missions I was mentioning to you about, a lot of them are about this. So we are advising NGOs to their digitization strategy so they can have something that is usable to go back to their boards in order to make a case when it comes to, okay, what is about my cyber insurance contract? What is about my business continuity plan? How can we ensure the different data protection obligation and the sectorization of our data in between the staff, the beneficiaries, and the volunteers? So that's something that needs to be thought out as part of the support provided to the NGOs. So it's not only funds and talent, it's also strategic help to think cybersecurity and to embed it into the culture.
Excellent, Stéphane. Thank you very much. And I've heard a great call to arms here. So thank you. And over to you, Lance.
Very good. Thank you all for coming today. And, just as we sum up this really excellent conversation with a group of esteemed colleagues, it's worth noting, I think, that, the organizations that we all work with or that we are employed by and members of have to gather data about the people that they serve in order to deliver their services. They have a duty to protect that data, because protecting that data in some instances can mean the difference between life or death, particularly if you're dealing with vulnerable populations. So we want to invite you, we need you to join us in advancing this coalition to support the safety and the security of the data that NGOs around the world must use to provide healthcare, to provide education, to provide emergency relief, provide support for women, children, and families, as well as vital life-saving services. We have some enormously capable partners here with us today on the stage, and they represent the beginning, really, of this effort. And we need you to take part. No effort like this can stand without strong, substantive, and flexible partnerships to make it real and sustainable. And both Okta as well as Cisco have provided some of the initial funds to get the basic version of this service off the ground. But with your help, your expertise, your unique capabilities, your regular participation in the Global Humanitarian ISAC, and your financial support, we can provide a bigger and more robust service to counter a threat that is growing and that, left unchecked, is going to compromise human service agencies everywhere. So we invite you to join us as a partner, as a collaborator, as a contributor, and as a funder in this historic effort to make the world and the organizations who are saving lives every day safer. So on behalf of all of us here at NetHope, at Okta, the CyberPeace Institute, Swiss SDC, and USAID, and ultimately for the digital protection of all the vulnerable people everywhere, thank you very, very much for your support today in making this a reality. Thank you again.